Right now, joining us on the line is Representative Jim Moran. Congressman, today I'm joined by Crystal Wright. Larry O'Connor has the day off. I know you're happy to hear that today because he's always tough on you.
Oh, I don't know. I like Larry.
All right.
I don't know Crystal, but I'm glad to be with you as well.
All right, likewise.
All right, listen, I want to start by talking about what's going on in Ukraine and in Russia. And you have been on record as saying that you think part of the problem here is that the Europeans are just not willing to stand tough against Vladimir Putin.
Well, I think that's a large part of the problem. Putin understands that they feel dependent on Putin for the strength of their economy. Mm-hmm. You know, Russia has been selling its natural resources to Europe, then sends the money back to Russia, pocketed by the oligarchs, much of it is, and then the oligarchs invest of their personal accounts back into Russia. I was over in London a couple months ago with some financial people, and they were saying, you know, we just can't end these sanctions because there's so much Russian oligarch money invested in London's real estate that it would implode the real estate market if that's serious about sanctions. And I'm afraid that's the way it is throughout Europe.
Well, does the situation with this plane change that dynamic?
Well, I would hope so. I would hope that at some point, you know, principle trumps expediency. But Putin has really figured out capitalism. He plays it much more viciously, if you will, than any of the so-called capitalist countries. That's unfortunately has been the case with all of these communist countries. The elite at the top pocket the money and keep their populations fairly ignorant and impoverished for the most part. And he's been able to get away with it. And I'm afraid that the Europeans are part of that. I just hope that they stand up. Maybe the Dutch, if now that they are getting the remains of the innocent victims, they'll be willing to stand up to them. But I'm not all that sure. They just a few weeks ago they were honoring the Russians how wonderful they were in Holland. So I'm not optimistic. It just seems like the United States is the only one that is expected to stand up for principle rather than profit.
Well, I think 2 points, Congressman Crystal here, and you raise an important point. The reason why Europe was lagging behind on doing anything to Putin is the oil and gas. I mean, it's like 40% of Russia, oil, it comes from Russia, right, to Europe.
Right.
It's maybe more than 40%. So
you know that Putin would cut it off.
Right. So what do you think that does? That's a resource that people can't live without. I mean, where else would they turn to?
Well, they could turn to the United States, and that's why, even though I'm a pretty ardent environmentalist, I think we need to look into expanding liquefied natural gas exports.
Well, and then finally, I have a question for you. You raised the United States. You talk about, the president was very vocal, I think, a couple days ago, and he kind of put the onus on Europe, but don't you think that the way the president dealt with Putin in Syria, don't you think that emboldened Putin to do what he's doing now because there's no consequences? We are the last man standing when it comes to the world, right? America. So what do you think about that?
Crystal and Brian, I think that's exactly I also have the perspective of having been in Congress. The president had no choice. Well over 80% of the Congress wanted nothing to do with a conflict in Syria. They were not willing to uphold the president's...
Congressman, can I stop you there? Because when you say that, and I hear what you're saying, that Congress wasn't on board. Well, what is the
American people weren't on board?
But what is the responsibility of the leader of the free world? Isn't it to bring the people along to where they need to be? In your estimation, isn't it on the president to convince the American people it was in our best interest?
Well, I actually said that at the time. I was strongly in favor of just not asking the Congress, because he should have known, and he probably did, know what the Congress was going to say. The other complicating factor was that the British Parliament voted not to get involved. And so we would have had to go it alone.
Right.
He would have had to take on all of his base, but it was not just his base, it was bipartisan. The Republicans didn't want to either.
But, Congressman, when I look back on the whole Syria debacle, people were for diplomacy, which the president... He shrank from that. Remember, he red lines in the sand. Assad used chemical warfare. Nothing happened. It was more like there wasn't a whole lot of diplomacy and tough talk going on with Assad either, and backing up the tough talk with consequences. I mean, he could have done Republicans were for that.
I think he should have gone ahead with the surgical strikes at the airfields and blown away a lot of the airfields and the planes. And then announced that he did it and explained why he did it.
Which
and I think
the Republicans...
Europe would have gone along with it, and I don't think the Congress would have had...
Well, Republicans said at the time he didn't need authority to do something with Syria. But remember, I think it's because he didn't want to be held accountable for anything. And now look where we are with Putin.
I'm not sure that was the reason. I think he really believes that... not acting unilaterally as a president, he thinks he needed... the kind of bipartisan support that other presidents get when they go into these conflicts. Because once in there, that was a declaration of war. And again, we've been talking about Russia. Russia is the principal supplier of arms to Syria.
Right.
That's why I got barred from going to Russia, because we had the amendment that passed overwhelmingly to say stop buying helicopters from Rosoborn Export when they're the principal arms supplier to the Assad regime. We were buying them for the Afghan war, but heck, buy them from Ukraine, or even better, buy them from the United States.
I want to get in with one other topic before our time runs out, and it has to do with this IRS, what I consider to be a scandal. It seems like every day, drip, 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 we're getting more information about hard drives that were destroyed, recycled, IT people who were mysteriously shuffled around at key moments because maybe they knew just a little too much. And it seems to me, when I look at the preponderance of the evidence as it is starting to develop, and every day there's a new little piece that falls into place that makes the puzzle a bit more clear, that there seems to be some there. Why are Democrats so reluctant to allow a full-on investigation? Why do they stand in the way and run interference for the president on this issue?
Because we feel that this is more politically driven than it is by policy, that most of the people who were using C4 designation were representing conservative groups who are not social welfare groups. Now, clearly there were Democratic groups too, but the best thing to do about this is to have a simpler, clearer tax code that does not give deductions for phony.
So you think there's no there?
I think there's very little there, and the reality is,
wow.
So why did Lois Lerner plead the fifth if there was no there? Why, and why did we find out after the fact that she did, in fact, was on many emails about the targeting, and she knew about it, but she lied that she didn't?
Every lawyer tells every witness to plead the fifth and not say anything that could hurt you. I don't know the answers to all of these questions, but I do know that there are a lot more important things to be concerned about. I don't think that
with all due respect,
of this, and what have you done to make the country stronger and better for its people?
I would suggest to you, and this is just me, Congressman, that when you talk about whether or not the IRS was used as a political weapon, that's a matter worth getting to the bottom of. But we'll agree to disagree on that. Congressman, thank you for joining us.
All right, Brian.
Always a pleasure.
And it's nice to be with you, Crystal. Thank you.
Likewise.